This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
Fever, cough, congestion. When the symptoms keep coming, but you've got to keep going, you can rely on Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One. Just one dose of Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One relieves up to 9 cold and flu symptoms, helping you get on with your day. Need cold and flu relief? Get Mucinex Fast Max All-in-One and Done Relief. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
It was 9 years later when I dug out his email address and wrote to him saying that I had carried a burden that was never mine to carry for all these years, and it was time to hand it back to him, that this was something that he was responsible for and not me, and I needed to put it to words because for very long I had silenced that part of me.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, a free, safe space for people to share and learn from others' experiences with mental health and addictions and traumas. I'm Todd Runnebaum, a suicide attempt survivor and a recovering substance abuser. I have an amazing guest this week. Her name is Thordis Elva. She is from Iceland, and when she was 16 years old, she was raped by her 18-year-old boyfriend from Australia. He was there in Iceland as an exchange student at the time, and years later they collaborated together on a book and a TED Talk, and they discussed both their roles in the rape. And so this is kind of a fascinating story. Of course, in the show notes I will put all of Thordis's links to her books and to all her stuff. And speaking of links, you can also go to my website, www.bunnyhugspodcast.com, to find all types of links and things there about me and the podcast and all that stuff. This is a long episode, so I'll just get right to it. So without further ado, I give you Thordis Elva. I'm honored that you are choosy with who you talk with, and I was chosen.
Yes, no, I think men talking about mental health is incredibly important.
Yeah, I do too. And unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but it's just a fact that I think my audience is like 80% women.
Right.
And I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but I wish more men would listen, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think that's also, a testament to how socially acceptable it is for women to think about and take care of their mental health, and men haven't gotten there yet.
Did I tell you I have a kid's book about?
You did, yes.
Oh, okay.
Daddy Cries.
Sometimes Daddy Cries, and I don't think a single male has bought it in person from me. It's always a woman, and even though she quite often buys it for her husband or buys it for her brother or her dad or her uncle or whatever. So there's still a stigma, and it's still a process for men to deal with the stuff. And then you have like leaders of the world like Trump who like perpetuate that whole thing of so like masculinity.
So many things that Trump perpetuates that would definitely not make the world a better place in any way, shape, or form. No.
Right. And saying that now, I'm thinking about you as a sexual violence survivor and knowing what the world knows about Trump, it must make your skin crawl listening to that guy and seeing him.
Well, yeah. Less maybe about making my skin crawl and more about, real worries about the effect he has on the world. Because American culture and American, debate is so exported. It's so global. Yes. We're all exposed to it, whether we like it or not. And
it's the world's most dramatic reality TV show.
For sure. Absolutely, 100%. And like his makeup artist should be fired because he is known as like Mr. Orange in various parts of the world. But his tanning lotion aside, when Tom and I gave our TED Talk, My Perpetrator of Sexual Assault, in 2017, it was released on the TED platform. What we were very consciously doing was, of course, countering Trump rhetoric, because Trump had been caught on tape saying that sexual assault was just locker room talk and just male culture. And we were very deliberately countering that, saying that sexual assault is, of course, nothing to be joked about, nothing to be minimized or normalized, because it's terrible. And it's always the perpetrator's responsibility, which Tom, of course, underlined and made a point to shoulder wholeheartedly and unwaveringly. So Trump has really, and his rhetoric, let's say, has really shaped this discourse and my work as a result. Yeah.
For people that don't know your story, you were sexually assaulted. And okay, so I know a lot of women who lost their virginity by a boyfriend, and it was not consented. And not even, well, sometimes not even a boyfriend, just another party goer or whatever. Yours lasted 2 hours, and it wasn't gentle, like it was a violent assault. I'm just interjecting here quickly in post to make sure that all the information is given to you. Thordis wanted me to make sure that everyone knew she was 16. Tom, her perpetrator at the time, was 18, and he was an exchange student from Australia and living in Iceland at that time. Sorry, I'm telling your story now. I don't know if you mind. Or
Go
if you want to tell it.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
just stop me at any point if I'm screwing anything up. But years later, you contacted your perpetrator. You guys got to talking. You stayed in contact for quite a few years. I think it was 8 years before you both decided to meet up in South Africa, because it was a halfway point between you two. And you made a week of healing and hashing things out and trying to understand why and all this stuff. And from that came a book, the TED Talk, and interviews and stuff. Damn, that was a big lead up to a question that I just forgot. Oh, I remember. So I find it kind of fascinating that the midway point is South Africa, which is also like the capital of the world for sexual assault.
Truly.
I don't know if that's irony or if that's what that is, but
I echo that. And so when I suggested a halfway point, I suggested 2 other cities, Montevideo in Uruguay and Santiago in Chile. They were also middle points between Iceland and Australia, which incidentally are as far apart on the globe as is geographically possible. And and Tom said, Cape Town sounds great. And his point was, we can easily make ourselves understood there because English is, the local language, or one of the local languages. And that's a good point. But I could also feel my stomach sink for the very reasons that you mentioned, that it has been dubbed the rape capital of the world, which is, a terrible term or title to carry, and perhaps not even fair, because I do think that sexual assault is one of those things that's really, really hard to pinpoint the scope of due to how underreported it is. And oftentimes the reporting rate actually shows how well women trust the police and how well women's rights have advanced in the country, as opposed to the actual scope of the problem. Because I would argue that in countries where women's rights are pretty much non-existent, women wouldn't ever go to the police with a rape charge because it just wouldn't, be worth their time. So
like Saudi Arabia or something like that, you're thinking?
Right. I'm thinking, I think, for example, in Afghanistan for the time being, where women's rights are effectively being erased and women are now prohibited from speaking in public, I think that is an example of a place where a woman, if she were sexually assaulted, would not go and report that to the local authorities.
Women can't even talk in public?
Their voices are now deemed as obscene. So it's obscene for a woman's voice to be heard in a public place. So that is like a huge setback for human rights, of course, because women's rights are human rights. So I would say that we can't really judge the scope of sexual violence from reporting statistics. But if we were to do that, then yes, South Africa would definitely be like one of the top countries in the world where this problem is massive and not being treated effectively, where it really isn't anywhere. But it's particularly bad in that place.
And I can't imagine any of them are collaborating with their perpetrator. Like,
well, actually,
this is an anomaly. This is oh, okay, go ahead. And actually,
yes, and actually, I know that mine and Tom's story, us having collaborated to kind of analyze, ultimately understand, and reconcile our past in collaboration with one another. I know that sounds quite foreign, alien to many people. And we are, last time I checked, the only perpetrator and victim in the world who's done so publicly and shared that, openly with the world. But that does not mean that we are unique snowflakes, because we are not. And I can tell you about in just one organization called Secasa, which is operating out of Australia. They do this service. They provide a place where they can have mediated conversations, facilitated conversations between perpetrator and victim of sexual assault. And they facilitate 2,000 conversations a year. So there's a lot of these conversations happening. They're just not out in the open. But people are talking. They are trying to reconcile their past or make sense of them or get some kind of alternative justice process between the two of them oftentimes, because the justice system is infamous for failing people in cases of sexual assault. So I think more and more people are seeing it as an enticing option to take matters into their own hands in a constructive way. And try to understand and get to the root of what actually happened, and process it emotionally to not have to face a future where trauma is kind of running the course of your life, this unprocessed baggage, in order to make the future a better place for yourself. Then having the minimal amount of baggage is optimal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating. I use that word a lot in my episodes. Fascinating. I'm fascinated by my guests, but it is fascinating that you two were able to do this and like no mediator, like that Australian organization that's amazing that they have mediators and people that help you through it. And you two just did it. And you were married at the time. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not inspirational. It's not respect, but it's bigger than both those words. I think it's incredible that you guys did that.
Thank you, but I think we also had to. I think both of us had to do it. So I think for us, it was less about being inspired to do it and more about needing to, for the sake of our sanity and our emotional well-being. And also because I think both of us wanted to have the best possible future, where we would be haunted as little as possible by this part of our mutual past, because oftentimes the past in the light of sexual assault is discussed from as if it were something that is only held by one party, the past of the victim or the past of the perpetrator. But in our case, like, it was so self-evident that this was a shared event. And the fact that we had a similar understanding of how that happened, of course, helped a lot. That our idea of the chain of events don't differ greatly. And he, from the first time I confronted him with the assault, wholeheartedly owned up to it and knew and stated clearly that he indeed carried out the actions that caused hurt and harm to me. Oh, you bet.
Because the first time you confronted him, you guys were both drunk at a music festival.
That is true. Well remembered.
and he ran away.
That is very true. I'm impressed, Todd. I'm impressed. That is like a subchapter in the book. True. I did try and bring it up at an earlier point, and you are
I don't
correct.
think you guys. Yeah, you didn't seem like you were both in the proper headspace to be able to deal with it then. No.
Not at all. Actually, I am in hindsight quite happy that that conversation wasn't had at the time. But no, when I years later dug out his email address, to be exact, it was 9 years later when I dug out his email address and wrote to him saying that I had carried a burden that was never mine to carry for all these years, and it was time to hand it back to him, that this was something that he was responsible for and not me, and I needed to put it to words, because for very long I had silenced that part of me. And it's funny how that voice just kind of broke free, like it just came streaming out of me at an unexpected point in time. I had been arguing with a boyfriend at the time. And I think, my relationships were quite tense. It is an isolating thing to carry trauma by yourself, and unprocessed trauma, no less. So I was having one of many fights with this boyfriend, and I stormed out, blinded by tears, got in my car, just drove to the fuck away to some place where I hope no one would recognize me. So I drove to a cafe that I rarely go to.
Is that a town in Iceland?
Yeah,
the fuck away?
Reykjavik.
I drove the fuck away. Sorry.
Good one. So there I am at the fuck away, and I have just ordered a latte or something, and I'm doodling in my notebook, and this letter just streamed out of my pen, and it surprised me because he had not been on my mind, and I had not been writing this letter consciously, but apparently it had been brewing in my subconscious, something that needed to be said. And so when it finally came out on the page in my notebook, it was perfect. Nothing needed to be changed. It was immaculate. So I thought, this is clearly something I have to tell him, if not for him, because I think it had the least to do with him. It had the most to do with me, putting down this weight that I had wrongfully carried. And handing it over. And I literally thought that he would shun it, ignore it. I would not get a reply. I thought that was the most likely outcome. So I kind of froze when I saw his name in my inbox a few days later. What the actual hell? And that's when I panicked a little bit, because I thought, what if he's going to accuse me of lying? What if he's going to say I'm making all of this up, or, that I'm a dishonest bitch, or whatever he can say, then will that hurt me? And if that will hurt me, then am I giving power to him by exposing myself to that? Am I actually reenacting and giving him the chance to hurt me all over again by opening this email? You know what I mean? So something that was meant to be healing and empowering for me all of a sudden had this dangerous kind of twist to it. But I did decide to open and see what his thoughts were, and I was floored by this confession that was sitting in my inbox, where he said that not a day had gone by where he hadn't thought of that night and his responsibility, and how ashamed and sorry he was, and if he could make it up to me somehow. And that question just stared at me from the screen, and I thought, how the hell do you make that up to someone? Is rape something you can make up to someone? It just kind of blew my mind, that question. And I don't think you can to answer that just quite simply. But I did realize that there was something he could give me. And it was the answer to the $1 million question that I want to say every survivor asks at some point in the healing journey. And it is the question of why. Why the hell? Why would anyone do that? Especially if you know better, especially if you have been raised with ideas of bodily autonomy and sexual consent, then what in you would make you go against those fundamental, ideas and values? So that is why we embarked on that long correspondence, as you referenced earlier. And it lasted on and off about 8 years, but it was sporadic at times. There were quite a few times where we took extended breaks, like more than a year. So, but we found ourselves returning to it regularly because something in our own personal development or in just the public discourse would kind of shed a new light on our mutual past. And so we would share that kind of discovery and part of like the processing, I think. And then it came to a point where I thought, I don't want to be his pen pal for the rest of my life. Like that was never my intention. So I want to put a full stop to this. And as much as I tried, I just found that I couldn't. And that's when I realized it was too personal and it meant too much to me to be concluded on a screen. It had to be concluded in person. And that's why we decided to meet up.
It's incredible for both of you to be vulnerable enough to do that. And I fully understand that when you said it was like you had to do it. It wasn't like, it wasn't a decision. It was like, okay, ultimately it was a decision, but it was more like you had to do it. Otherwise you were just going to keep spinning your tires. And so I've been sober 8 years next week. Hey, look at me.
Congratulations. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, after getting sober, there was some stuff that came up in my brain, traumas and memories and things that I can relate a little, I can relate to that part. I can't relate to your trauma, but I can relate to needing to heal things that bubble up. And it's true. It's like you need to. There's no option. There is no option. It's like,
no, if you don't, then the alternative is to keep trying to outrun that part of your past. And that becomes a really taxing process.
Yeah.
Outrunning and trying to numb things to the point where you don't feel them is very self-destructive. And I like
I'd say it's more than self-destructive. It was destructing my family and other people around me. Like they say hurt people hurt people. So I was like, okay, it wasn't an actual physical wound, but I was bleeding everywhere and everyone was being affected.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's why I like the saying, if you can feel it, you can heal it. So that's why we have to even when it hurts, even when it's a painful feeling, we can still heal it because we're allowing ourselves to experience that emotion. But as soon as we start suppressing and numbing and outrunning, as you just so aptly said, it's going to bubble up. And it's going to bubble up with the ferocity and with the potential to do damage to ourselves and others. So,
well, and yeah, to be the perpetrator and also have that burden of needing to heal. I'm not condoning what he did, obviously, but did you ever feel empathy for him at all?
Not to begin with. Right. I had to stay very focused on my own part of the healing. I had to prioritize myself, and that is what I would recommend for all survivors of any type of abuse. To remember that you have the right. I think that was probably my message. I'm sorry. So I'll just start.
It's a game show.
I'll start
bing,
this.
That's correct.
I can't recall what I was even saying before that happened.
You were focusing on your healing before you could show him empathy.
Exactly. I want to recommend that all survivors of any type of abuse prioritize their own healing before extending sympathy to anyone beyond that sphere. But I've also done quite a lot of research into forgiveness and what it is that enables forgiveness. Not because I'm a proponent of it or that I preach it, because I don't, essentially, at all. I think that forgiveness is a very, very personal choice that has to come to people when they feel that it is safe for them and right for them to make that choice. And for some people, that point in time never arrives because it isn't safe or right for them to make that decision or to have that conclusion to their emotional processing. So for me, it's clear as day that people can forgive or not forgive, and it's right and good for them. They're the only person that can possibly know what is suitable in terms of their own personal healing. However, that said, I have been fascinated by the concept of forgiveness. I find it so intriguing. I think, just the fact that it is somehow embedded in all of the world's major religions says a lot. And just how incredibly complex of a concept it is also fascinating to me. But what I have learned, and I just recently was interviewed on a German show where they had found researchers in Italy that have been doing forgiveness research on like the actual physical effects on our neurobiology and our physical beings if we forgive. And it turned out that it has such health benefits. It's insane. It just has instant effects on, like, it lowers cortisol, it ups oxytocin. It just has a really good effect on our physical well-being. But the key component was empathy and compassion for the person that hurt you or the person that did the wrong. To be able to see the wrongdoing through a lens of empathy or compassion was a key ingredient to being able to forgive whatever the transgression was. And I know for me, that rings true because I remember a time when I tried to, in my search for meaning and in my search for understanding, and understanding was incredibly important to me. Understanding why people would do such a thing as rape someone. I tried to boil it down to what are the catalysts that motivate people to act against their better knowledge, like when they know better. What makes them hurt or lie or kill or steal or rape? What drives us to do these things? And I found that in Tom's case, what motivated him most likely were things like, greed. He just wanted something and he took it regardless of how that would affect the other person. Being self-centered, thinking solely of his own wants and needs. Things like ignorance, not really understanding the impact of his actions, fear of not being man enough. If you don't get kind of the sexual reward of having a girlfriend when you're an 18-year-old boy, then are you even a man? You know what I mean? Like ideas of toxic masculinity, those kinds of things that helped, and helped is the wrong word here, but certainly aided him in getting to a point where he could make the decision to commit the unthinkable act, right?
It wasn't biggest majority of his decision was that. But there was a lot at play, and that was just a piece of it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right, okay.
Of course, there's so much at play here. But if I just hold those things, up and think of me, no, I have certainly never sexually assaulted anyone. But have I been greedy? Fuck yeah. Have I done things from a purely egotistical, self-centered place? Yes, I have. Have I been ignorant and afraid in my life? Have I been trying to live up to destructive stereotypes and impossible ideals? Then yes, I have, for sure. So it's not like I'm above any of the things that motivated him that night. And I don't think anyone is, honestly. But, the fact that it's never manifested in sexual assault is not a difference in nature. It's a difference in degree, I feel.
You're good at this.
I spent some time thinking about it. A little bit.
No, that was just a very human way to look at it. But like you said, you couldn't do it at first. Going through addiction treatment and the 12 steps and all this stuff. Yeah, it takes time for you to heal before you can. That's why forgiveness is like step 9 and 10 out of the 12 steps. It's not step 1. It's like you got a lot of work to do before you're even able to ask for forgiveness, let alone accept forgiveness. And I like that you say in the book, there's a big difference between saying sorry and forgiveness. It's true. I don't know. You're better with words. Explain the difference between being sorry and asking for forgiveness.
Well, I don't know. Sorry is like the diet version.
Sorry.
No,
it's like Canadians running into each other in the grocery store. Oh, sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry, eh?
No, that is a great example, actually. Sorry feels like something we say kind of like almost on autopilot when we cause like a minor inconvenience, and sometimes even when we don't. And I think that especially women are socially conditioned to kind of like apologize all the time for things they shouldn't even apologize for. Like bringing up an idea at a work meeting, like so many women preface it with like, I'm sorry, but I was thinking if it would be a good idea, and then, XYZ. And so I think that like, there's a real difference, palpable difference between I'm sorry and forgive me, because forgive me carries for me so much additional weight. And that is what I would say if I felt that I truly had caused harm or hurt, then I wouldn't dream of saying I'm sorry. Because
right,
I guess that there needs to be an elevation. There needs to be a stronger term for things that are well above and beyond bumping into someone at the grocery store.
Introducing the timely children's book, Sometimes Daddy Cries. The visually stunning book is told through the eyes of a boy whose father suffers from depression. He sees his dad get sad, rest, and even go to the hospital, all while comparing his father's depression to a physical ailment. Sometimes Daddy Cries is getting rave reviews from parents and mental health professionals alike. One critic has stated, "This is a timely and important book that will help countless fathers and sons broach the subject of depression." An Amazon customer commented, "An excellent book to open up a conversation with a young child about depression in a parent." Sometimes Daddy Cries is available in hardcover and paperback on Amazon.ca and Amazon.com.
Meaningless stuff. Why do we gift so much meaningless stuff? Tired of generic gifts and hollow trends? Shutterfly allows you to create meaningful photo gifts for your family and friends. Whether it's a cozy fleece blanket for grandma, a stunning canvas print for mom, or a mug to make dad smile. Enjoy 40% off with code MAKE40 at Shutterfly.com and make something meaningful this year. See site for more details.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. Technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
I guess saying sorry too, that's just a statement. Whereas if you're asking for forgiveness, you must be taking some kind of action to actually need that. Saying sorry, it's like actions are louder than words, right? And saying sorry is just words, whereas asking for forgiveness, there must have been some action behind.
Yeah, you're putting the finger on it. You're putting the finger on it. That's really nice. What you just brought to light is this, sorry being kind of a statement that doesn't really request anything of the receiver, while please forgive me is actually requesting something. And I think that is where we differ so wildly. You are so smart, Todd. I hope
because I'm hydrated.
I hope you pat yourself on the back at the end of this episode. But no, I really truly think that that is what also makes it such a divisive concept that people can get so angry about, is the notion that, the perpetrator requesting something when they don't deserve anything, when you have already hurt and harmed another person, then who are you to even be requesting or asking for anything from them? That would be point number one. And point number two, when you do give forgiveness, when you do meet that request favorably, then people also tend to find that a difficult concept to stomach at times, because there's this notion that by doing so, you're somehow laying your blessing over the hurt. And from my perspective, nothing could be further from the truth. From my perspective, you are actually underlining the hurt. Because there would be nothing to forgive had there not been a real and palpable harm caused, right? So that is being acknowledged. That is being acknowledged by the asking of forgiveness. From my perspective,
taking accountability.
Yeah. From my perspective, granting forgiveness is not granting blessing over what was done. It is saying, I don't want my future to be ruled by what was done. So I want to set us free from this. I want to set myself as well as you free from this, because if you are holding a grudge, and that's a great way of phrasing it, because you are holding on to something, you are holding that grudge, then you of course can do so. And for some people, there's a safety in that, and it keeps them in check. It helps them not to be sucked back into toxic patterns or relationships. And for them, it is a necessary barrier. So hold that grudge, girl, hold it.
Mm-hmm. It's like a shield.
I totally and utterly support those who feel that holding a grudge is necessary for them to protect themselves. But for me, it was a burden. It was energy I was spending on holding something and carrying it with me through life, when I'd much rather pack lightly and travel lightly, because life is long and arduous enough as it is, and it's tough enough without carrying extra weight. From my perspective.
Yeah, resentments and grudges, they can be very toxic, and yeah, they're just gross. I don't like those feelings at all.
But I do want to underline that I sat with anger and hatred and grudges for a decade, more than a decade. So I needed to, for sure. And anger and hatred and resentment and grudge are integral to my story, an incredibly important chapter of my life. And it helped me certainly process many of the feelings I sat with, the feelings of injustice. Anger is a natural response to injustice. It would be abnormal to not be angered when someone does something devastating. Of course. So I don't want to gloss over that part. I was certainly full of rage and hatred and rightful anger. And I needed to. But there also came a point where I thought, I really want to reinvest this energy into something that I think will serve me better.
You almost took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that those feelings of anger and resentment and all that, they just weren't serving you anymore, and you had to get rid of them. Because absolutely, yeah, of course, those feelings do serve you or serve people, I guess, at times, because it is a survival thing. It is something you have to process and go through. But yeah, when it's no longer serving you, then yeah. Then
it's nice to take back that time, that energy, and that space within that can be filled with more constructive things. Yeah, for sure.
Or hate for a different person.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm done hating him. Now who can I hate?
Exactly.
Do you think, I just wrote this down, I hope it sounds smart too. Is there a difference between accepting an apology and granting forgiveness?
Yes. In the same way that I think I underlined earlier that one carries more weight than the other. And and I think that is a very personal kind of difference in degree. You know, people have to assess when is something worthy of an apology, when is something worthy of forgiveness. And again, like, I feel that granting such a thing, as well as asking for such a thing, are, of course, things that no one gets through life without doing. We all need to, at times, ask for forgiveness and grant forgiveness to be able to coexist with other people. But it's very different, I think, the level that we are willing to do so.
Yeah.
And I was going to quote the oldest person I've ever interviewed on this subject, who is an 85-year-old lady who's like, you know, people only forgive if they have to. And I was like, that is very interesting. Tell me more. And she said, well, you know, like, your family members, you can't very easily like change families. I mean, people do discommunicate, like excommunicate family members for sure, but it's definitely much harder and has bigger and I guess more long-standing consequences than just deciding to change whatever it is that where you were offended or hurt. So let's say that, you know, I am subject to something deeply unpleasant at my school or workplace, then I can change schools or workplaces, you know, easier than families. So she was like, if people have a choice not to forgive and just remove themselves from that context, then they will do that any day. They will do that any day as opposed to forgive. And I thought, really, is that true? And I started thinking about it from my own life experience and like people around me. And I think there is a grain of truth to that. I think that like if I got shitty service at a fashion store, just absolutely shitty service, like someone, you know, just deeply offended me, then I would just take my business elsewhere. I wouldn't do the inner work on like, you know, finding the compassion for this person who is being a piece of shit to like forgive them. You know, I'd just be like, no, you know what? I'm just like not buying anything from you pieces of shit ever again. So I think there is
damn, those
like,
pants are awesome though. Like, shit.
Why are like always the awesome pants with the shitty service?
You're forgiven this time.
But no, I do think that is to some extent true.
Okay, I'm going to ramble a bit here. So step 9 is making a list of people you want to make an amends to, and then step 10 is making the amends. For me, humbling myself to the point that I'm asking for forgiveness actually taught me how to forgive other people too. I don't know, did you learn that lesson? Like, were you humbled at all by, no, I guess Tom would have been humbled.
I was humbled. I guess
that's a question for Tom, maybe.
Times. No. I was humbled by him many times, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think a taboo would be to speak of Tom's actions as something courageous, because it shouldn't be. Because owning up to your actions and taking responsibility should be like the default, right? It should be what we do when we fuck up, because everyone fucks up, right? But especially when it comes to sexual assault, that is not the norm. And it is definitely not the default. The default is doing what Donald Trump did, which is to deflect, minimize, normalize acts of sexual violence.
Run for president.
And run for president, as you do. As you do. So for me, now, all these years later, having had time to think about it and process that whole like kind of media circus that was generated about him and me, I very much do want to apply that word. I think it is fucking brave to have been the person that, you know, that did that in the year of Me Too, to say I committed, you know, a rape and there's no one to blame but me. I'm the one culpable here. She should not have to carry that shame and responsibility. She never should have. And it was a devastating thing that caused a lot of hurt and harm. And I'm here talking about it to underline not only how serious it is, because it's not to be normalized, it's not to be minimized, but I'm also hoping that by sharing my story this way, that someone else might refrain from thinking they can, assume consent or just have sex with their drunken girlfriend without her being able to partake or consent in that in any way, shape, or form. Because I'm deeply aware as well that what Tom, the misconception he was operating on is definitely not held by him alone. That, people of all genders all around the world have this misconception that once you're in a relationship, you kind of have the right to the other person's body and like an entitlement to sex, which of course is non-existent, and sex is something you always have to be 100% sure that you have consent for.
Wow. Well, that's interesting that you do consider what he did brave now. It's, again, I guess that's with years of healing. It took you years just to have any kind of empathy for him, and then it took even more years to actually think that, what he did actually was kind of courageous, because nobody fucking does that. So as much, as much
Absolutely.
as, it's not as shitty as a thing he did and should take accountability for, it is, that's, it's so nuanced.
Yeah. It's so nuanced, but also like to extend that same kind of grace to myself, then it took courage, on both of our parts, because of course, I didn't get an easy ride out of that media circus either. And I got all the slut shaming that you would expect. And I got also, I guess, accused of platforming him or by standing next to him on stage, kind of legitimizing that he would be seen and heard. And we live in an era of cancel culture, right? Where people are rightfully so demanding that abusers do not get influence, that they don't have that power in society. And I think that is definitely a step in the right direction, because throughout history, we've seen influential people abuse that power terribly, and being enabled by that power to continue their abuse. But in Tom's case, I beg to differ, that what he was doing with his platform was the opposite. He was trying to use his platform quite responsibly to counter the very problem that he had been a part of. And he was trying to become a part of the solution. And I want to say that there needs to be space for that as well, or we won't make any progress. It's simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the world is nuanced, and there can be exceptions, and there's a lot of gray areas in between being right and wrong and canceled or not canceled. And I'm, as the victim, I'm very impressed, I guess. I don't know, maybe now that's not the right word, but maybe it is, that you are not defending him, but like you are acknowledging him in what he's done. Not done as in the rape, but done as for you and for other victims.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it is inevitable that we fuck up, like, as human beings, living life.
Yeah, someday I will.
The day will come, Todd. It'll be a terrible day, but you will survive. But I do think that, like, when we do fuck up, it is not the fucking up that, is the thing that will define us. It is what we then do. And as a parent, that is like incredibly important to remember, because all parents will make mistakes. God.
Don't even get me started.
So many. Oh my God. Woo.
Yeah, I've got 2 mistakes eating me out of house and home right now. So I'm kidding. I'm kidding. They were planned. They weren't mistakes. I love them so much. They're my everything. Well, I'm a good father, okay? I should have said that, damn it.
Wouldn't it be nice if they came with a handbook, if kids like came with a manual? Like,
God.
And warranty, and you could like return them within 2 years if they're like defect.
Warranty, lifetime warranty.
Yeah, no. There should be a return, period. But no, I mean, as a parent, I make mistakes all the time. I have bad days where my patience is thinner, and I will like not be the mom I want to be for my kids on those days. And so fucking up as a mom is inevitable and a given, and that is not what defines my motherhood, but the repair process, what I choose to do after I've fucked up, is what defines me as a mom. And I think that that could go for anything, and I certainly think that could be applied to what Tom did. Many people want to define someone like him as a rapist, that he is, kind of summarized by the worst thing he did. And I understand that. I understand that, that label carries a lot of weight. And certainly for survivors, it's incredibly important to be able to call a spade and to use the right terminology and not gloss anything over, not sugarcoat anything. But I also think that there's validity in looking at people's actions rather than their identity. And we see that with young offenders. There's been beautiful work done with young offenders in countries like Sweden, where they're struggling to kind of combat gang culture in certain areas of the country. And they've realized that if they get to young offenders, and I'm not talking about sexual offenders, just young criminals, like if they get to them before they have kind of formed the identity that I am a criminal, then they're much more likely to be able to be rehabilitated and turned onto a different course. But if they have cemented this mentality that I am a criminal, that is who I am, that is my identity, then it's much, much harder to actually steer them off that course when you've decided that that is who you are. And I think it's the same with, sexual violence. If you assign the label of rapist to an 18-year-old boy and it becomes his identity, then I think you have a much slimmer chance at rehabilitating this person and making it into a person that actually has a healthy sexuality and can express it in a healthy way without causing harm to others. But if you help that person understand that they committed an act of rape and it was terrible, but it doesn't have to be who they are. It doesn't have to be their identity. Their identity doesn't have to be rapist. Then I think we have a much better chance at releasing that person into society as someone who will not repeat what they did.
We didn't really discuss what effects the rape had on you as trauma or as a PTSD, or between the rape and the healing, what kind of physical, mental, emotional struggles were you going through, or did you go through?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, I immediately, in the immediate aftermath, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I had very stereotypical notions of rape, and I borrowed them from films and TV programs, and they were like a boogeyman in a dark alley, or someone that hid in the back of your, in the back seat of your car, and so you had to check the back seat when you got in. It was very cinematic and far cry from what we know is the reality, that 70% of people who commit sexual assault are known to the victim and are someone they trust. So boyfriend, sibling, colleague, schoolmate, something of that nature. So I didn't immediately understand that what I had been subjected to was sexual assault, although I had all the telltale signs. You know, I had the physical injury, I had the emotional devastation and the trauma and the flashbacks. But yeah, it didn't sink in until maybe a year or two after the fact that I was like able to see it for what it was. And I think I also had some resistance, because who wants to face the fact that the first time they gave their heart away, it resulted in rape? Like, that is not an idea a 16-year-old girl wants to hold about trust and romance and love, right? So I also think I had resistance to facing the truth. But when I did, I think I very quickly came to the conclusion that it was useless to pursue anything in the way of, you know, legal matter or to do much of anything with this, because Tom had by then completed his exchange studies. He was an exchange student from Australia at the time, and he was already on the other side of the planet, and this was before social media, so I had, you know, very little reason to think I would ever see him again. Going to the police at that point seemed useless. I had no reason to think he would ever set foot in Iceland again. So yeah, I decided, you know, the best thing would probably be to just move on, apart from the fact that it wasn't even defined as rape in the law at the time to sexually assault someone who was incapacitated the way I was due to alcohol that night. It was classified as like a more of a minor sexual offense than rape, or like far less serious. It has been changed, and now it would be first degree rape, of course, as it should have been back then, but it wasn't. So what I did, I guess, is what many survivors do when they feel that they have no course of action that is apparent, which is to try and outrun and numb and put things behind me and suppress feelings that had anything to do with that night and that chapter of my life. And it was a costly process. It was really taxing. I became an overachiever simply because I filled my schedule, because I never wanted to stand still. I never wanted to have any time to reflect on the past. Because when I did, I just, you know, it all came creeping back, and, you know, I started counting seconds, which is what I did to survive the incident. And ever since that night, I know, of course, that there are 7,200 seconds in 2 hours, and I didn't want to be reminded of that. So I was a workaholic, and I had an eating disorder. But to be fair, I had an eating disorder even before the incident. Okay. But it just got worse. It just got crueler. I was just more cruel towards myself after the assault, which I think are just repercussions of self-blame and shame. And then I struggled with alcohol, like having more blackouts than I cared to admit, not knowing how to pace myself in my early 20s when it came to alcohol. So yeah, things of that nature were prevalent in my life, and I think they're very clear examples of having this unprocessed trauma in my baggage. Yeah.
Something that really kind of, I don't know, it was kind of profound in the book when you told Tom that this was just the first experience you had with sexual assault. It was like after him, you kind of became an easy target for others, it seemed like.
Yeah.
I can't remember how you worded it.
Exactly. Well, what happened was, you know, if your model student boyfriend who charmed your mother and who's eloquent and on the honor roll, if that person is able to commit sexual assault and rape you for 2 hours in your own bed, then it kind of warps your ideas about who is to be trusted. And who is worthy of your company. So I guess I kind of like went to the other extreme and kind of sought out unstable, and even like in some cases like, you know, dangerously unstable people, not only because they were as different from Tom as possible, but also because I myself felt unstable, and I myself felt like I was carrying a deep, dark secret, and it isolated me and made me feel weird and strange and not like I fit in with anyone normal. So I think I also sought out people who weren't normal, if that makes sense. And it often landed me in very dubious company, and often landed me with men that turned out to be abusive. So I did have a string of men in my life after Tom that I had various unwanted experiences with. So that actually lands me
not
firmly.
Necessarily. I was going to say not necessarily just sexually, but emotionally, mentally, physically.
Right, but also sexually.
Right, okay.
And that actually lands me firmly in the norm, in the sense that like statistics show, and I'm going to quote research from the US Army now, because they've done some admirable research into PTSD. They need to understand it to be able to take care of their veterans. And medicate their veterans accordingly. So they've done quite some research on PTSD and the normal, not normal, the most prevalent causes of it. And sexual violence, of course, is one of the prevalent causes of PTSD. And it turns out, and this is insane, it's so mind-blowing, but once you've been sexually assaulted, the chances of it reoccurring in your life go up 700%. I know, get out of here, right? Like, what the actual, what? But yeah, that is the statistics. So 700% increase that it will happen again in your life. And, you know, when I first heard it, my mind just went, you know, what? And then I started, just started churning like over possible explanations. And it's so easy to go down the slippery slope of victim blaming here and being like, people who have been subject to violence once, like just become more careless or slutty or just let their guard down or whatever. But actually, I think that we should be looking at perpetrators when we hear this statistic, because if you are someone who has decided that they are going to perpetrate an act of sexual violence, wouldn't you seek out a wounded prey? Isn't that what predators do? Aren't they seeking out people that might have broken self-esteem, people that clearly, have maybe had their boundaries erased before? So, thinking that they are in some way, shape, or form easier targets.
Do you think predators do that on...
Oh, that was my cat.
Is there a cat in here?
Yeah.
Do you think most predators do that consciously, or is it just for whatever reason it's their subconscious way to go about life?
I think it's very different from perpetrator to perpetrator. I think most men who commit sexual assault aren't calculated. They haven't decided at the, start of the night that they're going to end this night by committing a sexual assault.
Except for the guy in the back seat. Those kind of guys,
right.
maybe.
Exactly.
Right.
I think calculated, psychopathic perpetrators are very few in the grand scheme of things. I think most men, and actually this has also been proven or researched, that most rapists are opportunistic rapists. So, the guy that realizes that the hot chick that he's had a crush on, that he sits behind in algebra, has now passed out on the couch next to him in a party that everyone else has deserted. So it's not like he had decided at the onset that, he was going to commit this rape. But yeah, I think that if you have, if you have ideas of entitlement, which I think men are more prone to have in a patriarchal world, where, you know, the sense of entitlement comes from having a right to women's bodies, having a right to sex, that making you a man, that kind of defining your manhood and masculinity. It makes it easier for you to kind of justify feeding into that and doing things that feed into that.
Right, and if you've done it before and gotten away with it, because I'm assuming some of these guys probably had other relationships that were before yours where they did get away with it or weren't put to task.
I mean, a grand majority of them get away with it, you know, like only 2% of sexual assaults are reported, and that is like are reported.
2% are reported, and of that 2%, how many are like seen through to justification?
Yeah, that's a far lesser number. So there's like a 0.06, I think, rate of perpetrators actually being taken to court, and an even lesser rate that is like convicted. So I mean, it's one of the crimes that is most easy to get away with, so to speak, which is of course terrible to say. It's a sentence I definitely don't like to say. I kind of want to wash my mouth having said it. But yeah, no, definitely there's a lot of impunity surrounding sexual violence, and that's why I also make it a point to underline that the reason why Tom didn't go to prison is not because I don't think that is the correct response when someone's committed rape. I do think that people that do commit such a devastating crime should serve time. I do strongly feel that way. But we also know that was never an option for me. And we also know that even for victims who try and take that road, don't succeed in many cases. And we also know that the justice system is notoriously bad at doling out justice in cases of sexual assault.
Wow. Again, I kind of relate to unconsciously putting a target on your back. So I know I told you, and I've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, how I experienced some child-on-child sexual weirdness. And I've been struggling a little bit because it happened more than once, and it happened like the other people involved, they didn't know each other. Like, so it happened once with this guy, and then happened once with this kid, and it happened another time with this kid. And I've really been struggling with, like, okay, am I an easy target? What was going on? Or was I the one initiating? You know, like, well, why was that? Like, what is it about me that caused it to happen more than once and more with more than one person or whatever? I thank you for giving me those statistics, and it kind of normalizes it more to me, and that's like, oh, okay, I wasn't the perpetrator. Not that I felt like the other person was a perpetrator, because child on child, I think it's just fucked up kids doing shit, but it does kind of put that part, at least ease my mind a bit.
Exactly, and you're welcome. And I want to say that for children, a very normal way of processing difficult things that they find confusing, things that they find upsetting, a very common way is to reenact it. So children that experience something that they find, confusing or upsetting will reenact it in a setting that they deem safer. So that is extremely common. To gain
normalize
control,
it, to be like,
to gain control of the experience. Yeah. So
I see.
That's why you'll see children that have been sexually abused, like, reenact it with dolls, for example, because then they're gaining control of the narrative, they're processing it through the reenactment of it, making sense of it, and doing so in a safe environment. So it is entirely normal for kids to do that, but it can also, in some cases, lead to an instigation of it. But it shouldn't be accompanied by shame. It should be accompanied and viewed through the lens of it being common and normal behavior in children who have experienced something confusing or upsetting.
Thank
You're
you.
all right, Todd. You're all right.
Now what do I do?
You're going to have to start a new podcast now. Yeah. We just emptied this one. We've just fixed you.
Well, thanks. You wrecked it. Now what am I going to do? This was my bread and butter. Actually, I make no money on
Sorry.
this. That's a whole other issue.
No. Forgive me.
Oh, I love a good throwback. Yes. Apology accepted and forgiveness is granted.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question?
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to know from your perspective, you're one of the rare breed of men who think about mental health and think about emotional processing and where we stand, I think, collectively, which is why you're hosting these conversations and adding them to the public discourse. And I think that's commendable. I want to ask you from a male perspective. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. But I do want to know, like, what do you feel the, regular guy, quote unquote, regular guy's responsibility is when it comes to the area of sexual violence against women? What is the regular guy's role? Assuming that some regular Joes tune in or listen to our conversation, what can they do from your perspective to be part of the solution and not a part of the problem? What could you do to be part of the solution and not a part of the problem beyond what you're already doing?
So what more can I do to...
Apart from being a saint, because we've already mentioned that, what else?
What else could I do? That's a very good question. Should we record in a month so I can think about it? No.
In your new podcast?
My new podcast, yes. This is tough. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of guys that I find are, quote unquote, have toxic masculinity or entitlement and all this stuff, they are actually hurting, and this is a shield for them. I think they have some kind of untreated trauma, and they are acting out. This is how they act out from their pain and their trauma and have, quote unquote, control, just like an eating disorder. It's about control and reenacting things. It's about control. I think this is their version of control. I'm being general, that's not the reason for everybody, but I think it's so nuanced. So I think also just showing empathy, but not letting people, not condoning their behavior either. So I have a specific situation in my head and I'm tiptoeing around it a bit, but I'll just talk about it. Fuck it. So right now in my province in Canada, province of Saskatchewan, we're in the middle of an election. This is so hard because I'm not sure exactly what I can say. Anyway, I know this guy. He has 2 kids. They're twins. They're trans. They're 12 years old now. They've been trans since they were like 3. So it's not like a lot of people are like, oh, it's just a trend and everyone's just fucking whatever. So anyway, the opposition who's running against these people outed these 2 12-year-olds. Outed them as like part of their campaign. It's bananas, right? And I was furious, and I don't get furious often. And I went online and I said some shit, which then, like you said, when you open yourself up, then you open yourself up to all sides, not just one side. So I had a former neighbor come on and basically just trash me and trash anybody that was making any comments because he's anti-trans or whatever he is, or whatever his reasons were. The next day, he sent me a message and he apologized. He's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I don't even know why I did that. The thing is, I kind of know some of his history. And so what I could do was put him to task, be like, I think, yeah, you can do better or whatever, but also at the same time, give him empathy and I think when people respond quickly with lots of emotion, it's because of something painful happened to you, and this was triggering for you for whatever reason, yada yada. And so I was like, hey, we're all good, man. No harm done here, and kind of dropped it. So this is a long answer to your question.
But it's so
anyway,
thought-provoking. It's so thought-provoking. Like, I'm really having so many ideas based on what you're saying.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So, so I think so what I can do anyway, maybe not people, depends where you are in your healing journey, because some people can't, like you said, don't forgive or can't show empathy at the time. But if you are in a place where you can, just show not just empathy, hold people to task, because trauma isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility then to deal with it. So I don't think because you're bleeding, you are allowed to bleed on everyone. You have to put a Band-Aid on that at some point, and to show empathy that they're bleeding, but also be like, hey, stop bleeding on me, man. And here's a little seed of maybe this is why you bled. And just, because you can't push people into healing, right? You can't say, hey, fuck, man, you're dealing with shit. Like, go take care of it. That never works. But just to show, but yeah. And to maybe, and by doing that, maybe they have to look at the gray area. It's not black and white for them. And then maybe that could be the thing that has them change their mind or have a different perspective, or to consider healing and to think, oh, I guess not everyone is a bastard. And yeah, this is an answer that probably needed a month of thinking to put into words properly, but there's my sloppy answer.
I thought that was really useful, and it got me thinking about so many things in terms of, men's mental health being, such a neglected area, and how we're seeing that reflected in so much harm that not just men are perpetrating against others, but also themselves. And there's no coincidence.
And other men.
And other men, for sure.
Yeah.
There's no coincidence that 70% of successfully committed suicides are carried out by men. That is no coincidence. And men are dying from preventable diseases as well, in far larger numbers than they would need to had they just sought out medical assistance sooner. So we're seeing the cost of toxic masculinity, the cost of being, the tower of power, the person that, just pushes it down and doesn't release it and doesn't talk about it and doesn't cry and doesn't have a healthy emotional outlets. Like, we're seeing that clearly. So I thought what you said was really interesting, that, those who are carrying out the harm are often those who've been denied the emotional outlets that are constructive, because if they had, then they wouldn't be leaning on these destructive outlets and lashing out the way they are. And I think that's certainly true for a great portion of perpetrators. I also think that we have an entitlement problem as well that we need to also dismantle. Ideas of entitlement that I think are deeply problematic and are leading to ideas of superiority, and not just, oh, that was my cat's tail, I think. Yeah, not just superiority in a patriarchal sense that men feel that they, should run the course, or should be able to make decisions about women, for women, about women's bodies, etc. But also white supremacy, also other forms of structural oppression that I think can be directly traced back to ideas of entitlement. Yeah. Yeah.
As we're sitting here, I came up with the thought that maybe being part of the patriarch is a burden. Because you don't heal, it's like you have to keep up that facade that, and it's not, it's like a false entitlement. It's not even I don't even think they actually feel entitled.
I think toxic masculinity is most toxic for men themselves, and I think a great example I think a great example of that is how there had to be a de-radicalization effort in British schools because boys aged 11 through 17 were so brainwashed by Andrew Tate. And Andrew Tate saying things like, women shouldn't be listened to, they should just stay in the home, they shouldn't work, men make better leaders, it's women's fault if they're raped, all kinds of things like that. And what was happening in British schools was that enough boys were being brainwashed this way that they had become dysfunctional in the school environment, and they weren't showing up for, say, maths because the math teacher happened to be a woman. So boys were saying, I don't have to listen to women. Andrew Tate says we don't have to listen to women. So let's just think this thing through, right? So you're a 12-year-old boy who stops going to math because the math teacher is female. You're not going to graduate. And if you don't graduate, you're not going to get into, further education. And if you don't get there, then you're not going to land a desirable job in which you can work your way up and, reach an administrator or leader level position. So you're essentially, these boys are being doomed, to a life of less opportunity where they're gonna, lose out on so many things. They're never going to succeed or get far in a society where they're refusing to listen to or even work with 50% of the population. So who is the ultimate loser in this? Is it the women and girls that Andrew Tate is denigrating, or is it essentially the boys that become dysfunctional and become, are robbed of so many opportunities in life as a result?
Because they don't have these life opportunities, because they went this route, they have to seize control of anything they can. So then they abuse their partners, they abuse their children, and whatever. No, they abuse other men verbally, emotionally, whatever. And then the cycle continues.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that we tend to overlook that the biggest losers in terms of toxic masculinity are men themselves. And their biggest allies are feminists, actually, because feminists are the ones that are trying to underline and highlight the cost of toxic masculinity. And the only people I have heard in my 20-year career of working towards gender equality actively state the cause of men and men's mental health and how we need to be helping men break that cycle. And, we need to counter men's suicide rates. We need to ensure that men have a healthy relationship with their kids. We need to see to that men get parental leave. These platforms being pushed, that envelope, that's feminists that are pushing that. There's feminists that are keeping that discourse alive, that are really lobbying and fighting for those changes. So I don't think men oftentimes realize that feminists are their greatest cheerleaders and allies, and in terms of creating a more healthy, constructive masculinity that will help everyone win and just make a better society.
Well, when I do public speaking, when I do my talks, I try to always throw in there, when you heal yourself, you heal the world, because you do. You just do. It's just whether you're female or male.
Exactly. And that's why changing the world has to start here. Like, this is where you change the world. Like, you start here and you start within. And that's why, my favorite question, which thank you for obliging, is asking people, how would you contribute to the solution to this global problem? Because that is how we solve it. It is by the kitchen table. It is, legislation helps, political power helps, money helps, it all helps. But at the end of the day, the most tremendously effective and most important changes are the attitude shifts.
Hopefully men have good examples, or people that are setting examples for them to be able to normalize it. Because I think a lot of men, they don't connect those dots that, I drink a lot, I'm abusive, blah, 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 because of, connect the dot to patriarch or trauma or whatever. They don't connect those dots. And I think sometimes you need someone to be like, plant those seeds of like, hey, maybe it was, or those little hints or suggestions like, hey, maybe you need healing of some type. I don't know what it is, but
But that's on all of us. Like, we all are guilty in terms of gender stereotypes and upholding them. It is something that is like, a massive, I think it's an area that none of us are born in a vacuum when it comes to. So,
I was born in a hospital.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry,
okay.
I'm getting tired. It's been a long interview.
I was like, oh my God.
Sorry. You were talking about vacuuming?
We should have a joke jar, fine jar. That was a $5 in the joke jar now. And now I've lost my track. Oh, born in a vacuum. Right. So we all have to deconstruct the gender stereotypes that are holding us back. And that's work. That's work. It's hard. And it's like something that most people, I think, don't actively do or find the motivation for, but if they did, we would be better off. And I keep coming across them myself in my own, for example, parenting of my children. I keep coming across places where I see my own bias all of a sudden, like it is just revealed to me. And
oh God.
And I find that such fascinating and such helpful moments where I'm like, goodness, look at this. Here, I can do work here. This is an area where I can improve. And it excites me. It excites me that this is where I can effectively change for the better, and it will improve my children's life and outlook. And just to give you a quick example, when my firstborn was maybe 4, he was very curious about people, and he would continuously point at, people just doing various things, like someone riding a motorcycle, someone building, construction. And he would say, what's that? What are they doing? And I would see, the man is riding a motorcycle, or the men are building this house or whatever. And it dawned on me that I was creating a world in which men were the doers. Men were the ones that were active, where women were passive, and it's not true, and it's not who I want to be. And so I started to change it up. And, when you couldn't tell the gender of someone, which you can't in most cases, but especially in construction where everyone's wearing a uniform, or a motorcyclist that's all leathered up, I would just change it up. I would say, the woman is riding a bike, or the people are building the building. And when maybe a year later, after I consciously started to challenge my own biases, we were at home, and there was some drilling happening upstairs in our house. And I just automatically kind of said, what's that sound? And my 5-year-old son just, completely stoically looked at me and went, oh, the woman is drilling upstairs. She's probably hanging a picture or something. And I was like, wow, that is so neat. That his his go-to, the mental image in his head was that women drill, women do the drilling. I thought that was super fucking cool. I was like, well done. Yeah, you're right. There's probably a woman upstairs doing the drilling. Yeah, why not? Why the fuck not? So yeah, I'm proud to say that I'm also guilty of gender stereotypes, and I'm working on them. And I think if everyone just saw it as an exciting process, and not something to be ashamed of, something to be motivated by, oh, look at me coming across this thing that I don't need, that's not good for me or anyone else. Let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
If we all just gamified it and saw it as a win and not something to be ashamed of, then the whole thing would be a lot more easy and fun. I'd like to maintain. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of this, Thordis. Thank you, Tom, for collaborating. Tom doesn't really do much talking about this anymore because, he's got a lot of backlash. Let's put it that way. And quite frankly, so has Thordis. So She's very, very picky about who she speaks to about this. To be honest with you, we spoke for a good hour about a week before we recorded because I was being interviewed or basically going through an audition to see if I'd be worthy to speak to about this. And apparently I was. So thank you again, Thordis, and thank you everybody for listening. I think she's amazing. I think everything she has to say and stand for is incredible. So thank you again. And I really appreciate that Thordis is very choosy about who she speaks with because she's had some trauma in the past with media, and which is really just, people are weird, man. Media is weird. Anyway, thank you again. This is normally when I plug a bunch of stuff, but it's been a long episode, so I'll do that next week. So just please remember to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.